Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about the Buffalo Bills defense and what to expect from them in 2020. Before we get started, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow, and I hope you enjoyed the video. So when we start talking about this Bills defense, I really want to start about what did they do well last season? I mean, last season they were one of the best defenses in the NFL. So I first want to establish what they did in 2019. For starters, they had great coaching by Sean Mcdermott and Leslie Frazier. Also, they were the 10th best defense in the NFL in takeaways, but more importantly, they were number 2 in points allowed, number 3 in total defense, number 4 in pass defense, number 6 in first downs allowed, number 7th in third down defense, number 10th in run defense, and number 10th in sacks. All those major categories they were in the top 10 of, and that really just shows how efficient and how dominant they were as a defensive unit. Also, they were super deep along the defensive line as well as in the secondary. They had a few guys that went down with injury, but guys who were on the bench really stepped up and really proved that they could play. Also, they are a super nickel-heavy defense that likes to play a lot of zone. That's because they have a lot of good corners that can get to the football, and they just excel in zone coverage. So that's what they did. Also, they limited a lot of big plays. They were one of the best teams in the NFL to take away 20-plus yard plays, and also everyone did their job. Everyone did their 1/11th of what the entire defense needed to do, and that's one of the reasons why they were so successful. But also, they really timed and disguised blitz as well, and that really goes back to great coaching, but it also goes back to just great players that have good football IQ. Guys like Matt Milano or Tremayne Edmonds really understand the game, and that's part of the reason why they were able to time and disguise blitz as well and fool a lot of quarterbacks. However, now let's actually talk about the players on this defense. I want to start up front, and I just want to go over how deep this front five are. For starters, they have Trent Murphy. Murphy is a veteran. Former Stanford defensive end, and in 2019, he was solid. I mean, he wasn't that special. He had 5 sacks. He's not going to be a huge sack guy, but what he was a solid defensive end that can rush the passer, get to the quarterback, and be a solid guy that can be depended on. As I said, Murphy's a veteran. The most sacks he's ever had in his career before are 9 sacks, which he had in 2016 in Washington. But ever since coming to Buffalo in 2018, he had 4 sacks in 2018. He had not 5 sacks last year. So look for him to have 5 or 6 sacks in 2020. Also, at the defensive tackle position is Star Lotulelei. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, but he's a great defensive tackle who can stop the run. And last season, he even added 2 sacks. He's a solid guy. I mean, as I said, this defensive line is just so full of playmakers, and it's really, really deep that I just want to keep moving. Also, they have Ed Oliver. Obviously, he was the first-round pick last year, and obviously there was interesting things that happened in the offseason in an off-field incident, but we'll see how that impacts him coming into the season. But last year, he had his ups and downs, as are going to be expected from a rookie, but he had 5 sacks, 43 combined tackles, 24 solo tackles. So he was pretty good. He also had 8 quarterback hits. I mean, he was a solid presence along that defensive line, and he was a guy who wreaked havoc on that defensive line. Now I'm going to move on to Jerry Hughes. Hughes was a solid defensive end last year. He probably had one of his best games ever in the last game Buffalo played in, which was that AFC playoff game against the Texans, where he racked up multiple sacks. In the regular season, he had 4.5 sacks, but the season before he had 7 sacks, and the season before he had 4 and 6, and then 5. And then in 2013 and 2014 with Buffalo, he had 10 sacks. So this guy, he can rack up sacks. He's a dependable guy. He's been in Buffalo for a while now, and he's a trusty guy along that defensive line that Leslie Frazier as well as Sean Mcdermott are really going to utilize to rush the passer, someone that they can count on. But also in the draft, they brought in AJ Epenesa. Epenesa out of Iowa could have been a first-round talent, but he didn't perform well at the combine. So basically, he really dropped into the second round. I think he was picked 54th overall. And what he was at Iowa was a solid pass rusher. He had 11.5 sacks last year. He had 10.5 sacks the year before. And he's just a dominant edge rusher. I mean, he's big, he's physical. He gets to the quarterback. He's not going to blow by you. He's not physically gifted, like off the charts. But what he is when he gets into a game situation, he's an absolute force. So look out for AJ Epenesa. And talking about how deep this defensive line is, there's also Mario Addison, who they added from the Carolina Panthers. Addison is a little bit on the older side. He's 32. But for the past 3 or 4 seasons, he has been electric in Carolina. And he quietly has had some really good seasons there. He had 9.5 sacks last year. He had 9 the year before. He had 11 in 2017, and he had 9.5 in 2016. So you can expect 9 to 10 sacks from Mario Addison next year. And that really makes up for the big losses they had in free agency in Jordan Phillips as well as Shaq Lawson, who are both no longer with the team, and they were big sack guys. So bringing a guy like Mario Addison in is a guy who is going to replace that sack production that they lost in free agency. Also, they added Quinton Jefferson from the Seahawks. Jefferson had a really quietly had a really solid season last year. And his 3.5 sacks may not look impressive, but he was a force along that Seattle defensive line. He played in 14 games, and he was just a solid guy that a lot of teams did not look at, basically because he's not really a big name. And Quinton Jefferson's just another guy that can be trusted, and I'm just going to go through these names again. They have so much talent along this front four. They've got guys like Trent Murphy, AJ Epenesa, Lotulelei, Quinton Jefferson, Ed Oliver, Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, and don't forget about Harrison Phillips too, who could be a solid player on that defensive line as well. And now let's move to the linebackers, where really that's where the Bills make a lot of their damage. And let's start with Matt Milano here. Milano is a solid linebacker, is one of the most underrated linebackers in the NFL. And last year, he was really, really, really phenomenal. He had 1.5 sacks, but more importantly, he had 101 combined tackles, which was 65 solo tackles and 36 assisted tackles. Plus, he had 7 QB hits. He was all over the field, and he was part of that really, really dominant linebacking core up there in Buffalo. Milano is, as I said, one of the most underrated linebackers in the league, and look for him to continue to be a dominant linebacker, especially in coverage. He's quick, and he can get to the football, as well as a good coverage linebacker. Talking about good coverage linebackers who can also stop the run, Tremayne Edmonds is your guy. Edmonds is the heart and soul of this Bills defense. He is the leader. He's a Pro Bowler in 2019, plus he had 1.5 sacks. But more importantly, he had 115 combined tackles, 66 solo tackles, and 49 assisted tackles. And the year before, he had 121 combined tackles. So really, he was consistent from 2018 to 2019, and look for him to become even better in 2020 as he really established himself as a leader in that Bills locker room. Edmonds is probably the second best player on this defense behind Tre'Davious White, the corner, who I'll get to in a second. But Edmonds is just a solid linebacker who is an absolute game wrecker. So look for him to really be the heart and soul of this Bills defense in 2020. And also they added AJ Klein in free agency. AJ Klein did not have the greatest 2019, but he's a solid linebacker that can rack up 69, 70 combined tackles in a season. And he's another guy that the Bills can count on. I mean, he had 2.5 sacks last year, he had 2 the year before, and he had 2 the year before that. So they can count on him to be a good tackler, to break up the run game as well as the pass game. So look for AJ Klein to perhaps get a starting spot in 2020. But now let's move on to the secondary. Just like the front four, the secondary is just as deep, starting with Tre'Davious White, who's a Pro Bowler last season and a first-team All-Pro member. Tre'Davious White was absolutely awesome last season. He led the league with 6 interceptions, but don't forget, he's a big interception guy. He had 2 the year before that and 4 in his rookie season. The former first-rounder also had his first career sack last season, and he had 58 combined tackles, not to mention he had 17 pass deflections in 15 games. Tre'Davious White was shut down last season. He made opposing wide receivers disappear from games. He did struggle a little bit against Houston in the playoffs, but overall during the season, he was lights out. Plus, look at guys like Levi Wallace, who also had a good 2019. Wallace is one of the most underrated corners in the NFL, but he was really good last season. He had 2 interceptions and 76 combined tackles, paired alongside 9 pass deflections, and he's another trusty, dependable guy in that secondary. Also, as I'm talking about, this depth in the secondary is ridiculous. They also have Taron Johnson, who was really good last year, filling in at times. He had 50 combined tackles, as well as 5 pass deflections. And also, they brought in Josh Norman in the offseason. Norman is one of the overrated corners in the NFL after having a great 2015 campaign, and he's been overrated for a while. And that means that in Washington in the last few seasons, he really hasn't performed to what he has been able to do in the past. Yet, Norman is still a great corner. He can still be elite at times. He did struggle last season. But in this Bills secondary where there's so much talent, I think Norman could stand out. He gets a second chance in Buffalo. They signed him for cheap. And I think this is a good move, not only for Josh Norman to be able to play in the NFL and to be on a good football team, where in Washington he really wasn't a part of a good football team. He's now on a playoff caliber football team, but he's also part of a defense that's going to be one of the best defenses in the NFL, and it's going to show that he can still shine. Plus, at the safety position, there are two of my favorite safeties in the NFL, in Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. Let's start with Jordan Poyer. Poyer last season was one of the most underrated safeties in the NFL. He had 107 combined tackles, and he had 100 the year before. So he's a consistent tackle guy. He had a sack last season, and he was just all over the football field, breaking up plays and getting to the football. So look for Jordan Poyer to be really, really solid again in 2020. But also don't forget about Micah Hyde. Micah Hyde was a Pro Bowler in 2017, but in 2019 last season, he had 50 solo tackles, 72 combined tackles, and he was another guy that was all over the football field, breaking up passes. So look for Micah Hyde to be another guy that is going to be really, really good in 2020. I mean, this Bills defense is led by great coaches in Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott. But more importantly, they have star power everywhere. They've got Pro Bowl caliber players in guys like Tre'Davious White and Tremayne Edmonds. Plus, they've got good players all over the field. I mean, Micah Hyde's a former Pro Bowler. Obviously, Josh Norman is a former Pro Bowler. Matt Milano has Pro Bowl capabilities. Jerry Hughes can easily put 8 sacks up the season. And I think this Bills defense is going to be really, really solid. And plus, with the guys they added on offense, like Stephon Diggs, who was a big acquisition from the Vikings for a first-round pick, this offense is going to be a lot better. And therefore, this Bills team, just as a franchise, is going to be really, really good in 2020. I think they could make it to the playoffs. I think they could win the division, even with a guy like Cam Newton going to the Patriots and revitalizing what the Patriots will be able to do in Foxborough. I think the Buffalo Bills are still the favorites to win the division. They're going to have a better offense because they brought in Stephon Diggs. They're going to have just as good of a defense. And with that said, I think if that offense can improve, it was stagnant at times last year, but it should, with obviously Stephon Diggs coming in, as well as they brought in guys like Zach Moss in the draft. And that offensive line should get better. So look for that offense to get better. Look for that defense to get even better than they were last year, because they brought in some big guys in free agency that are only going to help them out. And AJ Epenesa is going to look to be a force in the pass rushing game. So overall, look for this Bills team to really be a dominant team in 2020. I wouldn't be surprised not only if they made the playoffs, but really went on a roll in the playoffs. So watch out, Bills fans, for the Buffalo Bills to be a really solid football team in 2020. Now that you've reached the end of my video, I want to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it helps my channel out, and check out my other videos on my channel. Also, you can follow my Instagram. The link is in the description down below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, see ya.